Hello, everybody, and welcome to another amazing Friday in the Vidor Locksmith Show, where we are unlocking the secrets to success in the oil and gas industry, one episode at a time. Wow, I am so excited about today. We have an amazing episode for everybody out there. So as per normal, please let me know if my audio is working. Also, number two, today we are also live streaming on YouTube. So trying to step it up a notch and see if we can get both LinkedIn and YouTube working at the same time. And hopefully everybody that's on LinkedIn gets the notification. That's kind of where the primary audience is at. But if we can also get YouTube working, then that's one less step I have to do as far as downloading, doing all the stuff, re-uploading, and then having it over there. So I'm being lazy by broadcasting to two different places at the same time. So please, guys, let me know. I'm trying to get it pulled up. How do we attend? All right, got more people on the LinkedIn atmosphere that are still trying to figure out how to watch the show. So got those messages sent across. Oh, my audio is still coming in. There we go. Sorry, audio was playing on my thing and in here at the same time. So that's working. This is working. Everything's working. Looks like it's good. People are saying they can hear us. So we've got Ian McCourt, Brandon Foster, Pascal Ray, Duncan Groves, John Dahl, Henny. Ivor, tag somebody that you think would get a lot out of the episode today. Just tag them in the comments. It's a little bit easier than sharing the broadcast. If you want to share the broadcast, do that as well. I think it actually makes you leave the broadcast, though, when that happens. But tag a friend. Let us know where you're watching from. We always want to be able to give a shout out. Be interactive. Ask as many questions as you like. Also, I know a lot of people, if the question comes up and you feel like being the one to answer it before we can get Amy Fox to be able to answer it, then be sure to do that. So also send a connection request to anybody you've seen on the show, whether it's Brandon Foster, myself, Dr. Amy Fox. We'd like to be able to connect with you guys. This is the whole point of LinkedIn, is being able to connect with each other and be able to help each other out, especially during a time like now. I'm trying to think if I have any other announcements to make. I really don't. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and play a quick little commercial, and then we'll bring in our special guest for this week. We see Blaine Como, James Butler, Joseph Doucette, Carlos, everybody, Todd Ormsby, Todd, who was formerly on this show. As I'll bring it in now. I don't know about you guys, but I get psyched up every time I hear that. Guys, let me know. I would love to be able to hear some feedback about the How It's Done series, if you guys have liked it. If you want to be on season 2, get in touch with me now. We are starting to fill out all of the companies for season 2. So if you know somebody, or if your company does some kind of manufacturing that goes into oil field services or oil field products, please get in touch with me. We are looking for companies to put onto season 2. All right, so without further ado, we have the amazing Amy Fox, the chief peddler of geomechanics from Enlighten. Oh gosh, I already messed this up. Enlighten Geosciences. Oh, wow.
Yeah, you got it. Enlightened Geoscience.
Enlightened Geosciences. It's been, I always mess up at some point in time, and you guys should expect this by now. I am not perfect. I'm not an expert.
Now it's done. Now it's over.
Oh yeah, my one mistake of the done. The 2 mistakes of the day are done and out of the way. Amy, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been watching your shows and I've really enjoyed them. So it's a pleasure to be your guest today.
Oh, you don't have to lie to be on the show. You're already here. All right, guys. So just so y'all know, like I said, please send a connection request. Send this link to somebody else. Contact somebody. Let's get this one up over 200 today. That's the goal. I want to beat Neil Armstrong's. And if Neil, if you're watching, or anybody from Merlin, I apologize, but trying to beat Neil's numbers today. So, Amy, give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you got into the geomechanics and oil field space.
Yeah, it's an unlikely story. I grew up and went to college in New Hampshire and studied a lot of igneous and metamorphic rocks, and then found myself out at Stanford in California for grad school, where everything was oil and gas and earthquakes and sedimentary rocks. And so I had a lot of learning to do there. But while I was in the geophysics department at Stanford, I took Mark Zobac's courses. He wasn't my advisor initially, but I took his courses on geomechanics and I just loved them. So I got my master's. I went to work for, Mark had just started a company with some other people from Stanford, and I went to work for them doing geomechanics consulting. Just loved it, but realized I needed more education in it. So I went back and got my PhD with Mark, and then went back to work in the consulting world. And Baker Hughes bought that consulting company and in 2008. And so then I was working for Baker Hughes for a while. They sent me to Canada, where I am now, and here I started my own consulting company. So I've had Enlightened Geoscience for almost 5 years now. Yeah, 4.5 years or so now. So it's been a while. It's been fun. We've done lots of different kinds of projects, and some things I keep running into that drive me nuts. And today's my opportunity to address some of those. So thanks for giving me a soapbox.
You know, maybe that's what we should just call the show. Just call it the soapbox show. Give everybody the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to do something cool. So this is a new feature that we've got here. So let me see here. So I think we can see. So Blaine Cobo says nobody's perfect, David. So this is cool. So now when you guys comment, I can actually bring it up on the screen with your little picture on there.
Look at that.
So Blaine, thanks for being the guinea pig. So I hope this doesn't scare anybody away from commenting or anything. But now when you ask the question, we can actually bring your question up on the screen. So please be interactive. So we've got my buddy Nathan Leroux that says, good morning, Gibby. So for anybody who doesn't know, my nickname's Gibby. So there we go. So Nate, thanks for watching the show today. I appreciate it. Somebody who's always watching the show, Kurt, just completed Mark Zobac's 2 online geomechanics courses. They're great. Kurt, thank you so much for watching the show. We appreciate you being here. Peter Aaron, preach away. Peter's always interactive on LinkedIn. If you guys haven't connected with this guy, you definitely should. This is like the black hole of knowledge. It's never ending. So, all right. Well, thank you guys so much for all being here. This is great. We're up to 120 viewers, guys. Please tag a friend in the comments. Please connect with both of us. Follow the VDOR, the hashtag VDOR Locksmith. And I guess with that, Dr. Amy, it is all you. I will let you take it over and educate all of us on what we should be knowing as far as geomechanics and busting some myths.
All right. So you'll pull up my bingo card then.
Yes. Okay. Wait, remove from screen. Nope. Add to stream. There we go. It was already up.
There we go.
All right.
So I was motivated to make a geomechanics bingo card after the lockdown started, and I started seeing conference call bingo. I don't know if you guys have seen that one, but it's got things like, you know, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Your mic is muted, dog barking and stuff like that for online meetings. So I decided to make one for geomechanics. I'm not going to hit on all of these topics today, so grab a screenshot and keep it handy and see if you can win bingo and mark off the different topics as I talk about them. Gotta get back. There we go. Okay, so prior to this presentation, for the past week or so, I put up a note on LinkedIn asking for suggestions for topics for today, and here's just a few that came in. So one of them was the need for a geomechanical model stops after the first well. I think that's a good one. There's sort of a balancing act there from my perspective. Clients sometimes say, you know, do we have to do a full geomechanical analysis on every well? And it kind of depends. It depends how complex your field is, how changeable your drilling program is. You know, you may not need one for every well, but if something substantial changes, either in the geomechanical setting or about how you're drilling your wells, you may need to do another analysis on another well. So it's a balancing act. Another suggestion was that drilling inside the mud weight window will ensure no problems will be encountered. Or as somebody else put it, mud weight fixes everything. Well, of course, nothing's perfect. Mud weight windows are a prediction, and even if we try to adjust them on the fly, we're not going to get it 100% right. So of course, it's not going to fix absolutely everything, but I think if you want to go back and watch Fred Dupriest's interview, you'll see that it fixes a lot of things. Neil Armstrong too. Both of those were really powerful presentations. I recommend you finding them and watching them if you haven't seen them already. Another one is stress estimation from seismic, and that's one I am going to address today later on in the slide deck, so I won't say anything more about that right now. And somebody else said all geomechanics rules of thumb. Well, that's a bit broad. I'm not even sure exactly which ones they were talking about, but hopefully I'll hit on some of the ones that they meant today if they're here. And the last one was that geomechanics is an art. And I think my take on this one was that somebody's nose was out of joint a little bit about geomechanics. Maybe they were, maybe they were confronted with somebody who said that only, special people can do geomechanics or something, but I don't know. I do sort of consider it a bit of an art, but, it's based in physics, and that's what I love about it. So what I'm going to really talk about today is these are the myths I'm going to address. So you can always calculate stress from logs or seismic. Brittleness is important. Wellbore stability problems are a thing of the past, something we've solved and don't have to worry about anymore. Increasing ROP is all that matters. And hydraulic fracture models are right. And faults and natural fractures aren't important. So 6 topics, I'm going to lump them into 3 different broad subjects that we'll take on. So the first one is just fundamentals of stress and rock properties. And the second one is wellbore stability, drilling optimization, and hole quality. And then the last one is hydraulic fractures and natural fractures. Not going to dwell on that one too much, but I just want to bring up a few points there. So the first 2 are going to make up the bulk of the presentation. So fundamentals of stress and rock properties, or from my perspective, please take a moment to know what you're talking about. So if I'm talking to a client and they want to talk about stress and rock properties, I want to make sure they understand the basics before they get off on the specifics. So here is a slide that is not pretty. I use it a lot. I know any graphics designer person would tell me to throw it away, but I think it's a pretty powerful slide because it takes, I'm going to bring up a pointer here. Thanks to Kurt Armbruster for telling me how to use my pointers in PowerPoint, PowerPoint online. So here at the top, you've got various types of data and information that feed then into this box, which is stress determination. And then below that, you'll see all these different applications. So everything from sand production analysis, the analysis of fractures and faults, hydraulic fracture modeling, wellbore stability planning, all of these things should be done with a full understanding of the stress state. And you see all the arrows go into this box and everything else comes out of it. It's really common to see shortcuts taken. So for example, just looking at drilling problems in the area and then going straight to planning a well, assuming that, you're going to experience the same thing that they experienced without understanding the actual causes and how to avoid problems. The other really common shortcut I could point out is going directly from a mini frac or a DFIT to a hydraulic fracture model and entering that information, but not understanding the full 3D state of stress. So, what do I mean by that? So let's look at that. So in the earth, we have what we call 3 principal stresses, and often we assume that one is vertical, and that's the weight of the overburden. That's our vertical stress. And then 2 of the stresses are horizontal, one being SH min and one SH max, so one smaller than the other. And the stress regimes are based on the relative magnitudes of these 3 principal stresses. So we have in this case, our overburden is our maximum stress and our two horizontal stresses are lower than that. So in that case, we have what's called a normal faulting environment. And this is really common in passive sedimentary basins. So where there's rapid sedimentation, and that's that's the maximum stress, is that overburden. But in other areas, we have strike slip faulting, and that's where the vertical stress is actually the intermediate stress between the two horizontal stresses. And then we have reverse or thrust faulting environments where the overburden is actually the least principal stress and the two horizontal stresses are higher than it. And these are more common in tectonic basins where we have active tectonic forces, and such as here in Western Canada, we have that kind of a basin. A passive sedimentary basin, that would be more like the Gulf of Mexico, offshore, UK, that kind of thing. Although you do get, as we'll see, there's things that can perturb the stresses and cause localized differences in stress. So one of the first data sources to go to understand your stress environment is the World Stress Map. So this is a compilation of data. It's now decades of data collected, and it maps out, the tick marks give the orientation of the maximum horizontal stress, and the colors indicate the faulting regime. So red is normal faulting, green is strike slip, and blue is reverse or thrust faulting. It's kind of hard to really see much at this scale, so we'll zoom in to an example. This happens to be the Netherlands as an example, and what you can see is the SH max orientations, pretty consistent, but can change locally. The little symbol in the middle of the mark, that tells you what kind of data that data point came from. So we have everything from earthquake focal mechanisms to borehole breakouts and other data types represented. And this is a pretty good example because you can see where the tick marks are black, it means we don't actually have relative stress magnitude data, we only have the stress orientation data. And most of that data comes from drilling for oil and gas. There's a lot of stress-induced wellbore failure indicators there. And then here in this region here, you can see it's fairly complicated compared to offshore. Here we have varying stress orientations. We have all three different stress states in a relatively small area. So if you're down here, you might have to do more localized geomechanical analysis to understand exactly what's going on. So some of the things that can cause the variability in stress, this is just a short list here. So we have tectonic forces, local faults, differences in crustal thickness, uplift and erosion, glaciation or deglaciation, rapid changes in topography, localized loads. So, there's a lot of different things that can affect the stress, and that's why it's quite important to do the homework to figure out what the stresses are where you are operating. So this brings us to how do we figure out what our stresses are, and this is one of the main points I wanted to get to today. It is very common practice for stress to get calculated from logs or seismic. And usually it's applied for SH min, but also sometimes SH max. And this is what's used in hydraulic fracture models. So it's important to understand the limitations of this methodology if you're modeling hydraulic fractures. This method assumes that all the horizontal stress is derived from vertical stress. So there's no tectonic component, or it's a passive basin. So what's happening is the sediment is loading, and as you can imagine, as it gets heavier and heavier, it's putting pressure in the subsurface, and if you can picture it in your mind, like subsurface wants to stretch, but it can't because it's confined. So you get a buildup of horizontal stresses there. And so for decades now, in the 60s, I think, were the first equations for calculating stress from logs. And you can see here, we have horizontal stress is a function of this nu, which is Poisson's ratio, the overburden or vertical stress, and the pore pressure in the formation. So it's a relatively simple formula, and it's based on primarily the overburden and Poisson's ratio. And then this has been modified over the years in various ways to include maybe some other factors, such here, this alpha is the BO coefficient. And then sometimes there's another factor added on to try to account for some tectonic stress component. So that tries to allow you to have different SH max and SH min, because if you're just using this formula, they come out the same. But it's really quite an important assumption to make to say that you're in a passive basin where this is an appropriate way to calculate stress. So this brings me to the rock properties part of the discussion. So Poisson's ratio, what is it? Well, Poisson's ratio, it describes the ratio of lateral strain to axial strain under an axial stress. So down here at the bottom, I have kind of a cartoon of what's happening when you do a triaxial test. You apply stress in the axial direction on the core plug, and of course the core plug deforms a little bit in laterally, and then it squishes axially.
Amy,
so yeah,
just a second.
Okay.
You might have been broadcasting live without me for a second. I don't know if it was actually working, so I've got to pull a couple of things back up real quick.
Okay.
To make sure everything was still working.
Okay.
If you guys are watching on either LinkedIn and or YouTube, please let us know if we cut out or if we need to start again. It says the broadcast is still going, at least with YouTube. So
yeah, I'm looking at the comments, and there's still comments flying around. I'm not seeing any about something not working.
Well, that's good to know that I can be just completely cut out of the show and everything still works. So
we don't need you, David.
how the times have come. Y'all don't need me. All right, let me double check this real quick, guys. We're almost there. Let me make sure, because if it shows me up here on the screen again. Okay. Okay. All right.
Everything was fine on YouTube, I'm seeing.
Everybody's saying it's fine. It's keeps. Okay, sorry. Sorry, guys. I just had a quick snafu with the internet. If you guys don't know, I live out in the boonies, and that's where the office is at. So everything back to working, and we've got a couple of questions coming in. You let me know when is a good stopping point, and we'll fire off a couple. So let you go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple more slides, and then that'll be the end of this section. That's probably a good time.
All right. Sorry, guys.
All right. So we went from calculating stress using Poisson's ratio to trying to understand what Poisson's ratio actually is. So as you can see, it's the ratio of this lateral strain to axial strain when you apply a load axially. And if you do a triaxial test, you'll get a plot something like this. This is the radial strain. And from the slopes of these lines, you can get Poisson's ratio. But generally, it has a pretty narrow range in most rocks. It's usually between 0.2 to 0.4. And we have a pretty commonly applied way to calculate it from logs or seismic using the P wave and the S wave velocities, or the compressional and shear velocities. And that formula is right here. And that's an industry standard way to calculate Poisson's ratio. I have no problem with that. Now, if you're at all familiar with brittleness, which is one of the thorns in my side for the past 10 years, you'll know that Poisson's ratio is usually discussed along with Young's modulus. So what is Young's modulus? Well, Young's modulus describes the amount of strain in the direction of applied stress. So that's this axial strain with the applied axial stress. And so again, you get that off of the strain plots from your triaxial test. And it has a very wide range in rocks, anywhere from 1 to 70 gigapascals. So it can be important to measure it and get that right. We also have a pretty standard way to calculate it from logs or seismic, and I give that equation, or at least one common equation down here, where you can see it uses density. That's this rho symbol here, and the shear wave and P wave velocities. And so that's typical equation for that. So I want to point out that if you are being sold rock property or stress logs or volumes from seismic, you need to understand that these are not measurements. These are calculations based on velocities and densities. And I know I'm probably never going to work for a service company again, especially ones that I point the finger at. But I had a look yesterday. I thought, well, what does Schlumberger, for example, what do they explain about their product when they sell a sonic scanner log? And usually that comes with stress logs and rock property logs. And so this is from their brochure. And it says that for geomechanics, you can, with the sonic scanner, analyze rock mechanics, identify stress regimes, determine pore pressure, and evaluate well placement and stability. I read through the brochure and no explanations are given regarding how these are done, just using the sonic logs. And occasionally I do see somewhere in the log headers when these things get delivered that there will be an explanation about the equations and the assumptions that were used to calculate the rock properties and the stresses, but not always. So it's really important to understand that these are calculations and you should go and ask your service provider how they were calculated. So I mentioned brittleness. So speaking of Young's and Poissons, they are usually brought up at the same time to talk about this thing called brittleness. Well, what is it? What is brittleness? So originally we talked about brittleness in terms of the relative proportions of brittle minerals in a rock. So quartz, feldsparks, pyrite, carbonates, these are brittle minerals. And then we have clays, which are more ductile minerals. And so you could classify a clay or even specific rock according to the percentage of brittle versus ductile minerals that are in the rock. Somehow, this turned into a relative scale called brittleness that has rapidly over the past 10 years become extremely popular in unconventional plays, and it really doesn't mean much. We usually see it expressed like this. We look at a cross plot of Poisson's ratio and Young's modulus, and if you have low Poisson's ratio and high Young's modulus, then you have brittle rock. And the source seems to be an SPE paper from 2008, where I took this quote from. It says, the concept of rock brittleness combines both Poisson's ratio and Young's modulus. These two components are combined to reflect the rock's ability to fail under stress and maintain a fracture once the rock fractures. So the parts I take umbrage with are Poisson's ratio reflecting a rock's ability to fail under stress. We just talked about what Poisson's ratio is, and it has nothing to do with rock failure. It has to do with rock deformation. And then also using Young's modulus to indicate the ability for the rock to maintain a fracture, I think is a major stretch. I don't see how that is really relevant. So most of my colleagues and I agree that this is nonsense, but it has become so popular and so persistent that we have to address it on an almost daily basis. And we have to explain why we don't like it. And some people don't like to talk about the physics of it. My biggest beef with it is that it's a huge distraction from what's really important. So I usually tell my clients, let's just take a step back, you know. If your calculated Young's modulus and Poisson's ratio are changing along the wellbore or throughout your seismic volume, it's because the densities or the velocities are changing. So what is causing those changes? I have no problem with trying to evaluate rock based on real and relevant rock properties, but I think brittleness is a distraction. Okay, enough of that. End of that section. We had some questions.
All right, so I really like it when you call out the big blue company. So that's what you guys get for laying me off 10 years ago. So. Didn't realize the talent that you possessed. All right, just kidding. I was terrible back then. Still terrible now, according to Blaine Como, who keeps reminding me. So guys, if you guys do ask any questions, I'm trying to keep up with them the best I can. I'm having to reload the comment section a couple of times. So if you guys do ask a question that we don't get to, please keep watching, stay tuned, ask it again, and then I'll try to be able to make sure that we bring it up on the screen. So this one's kind of a generic question. It doesn't really go to what we've talked about so far, but what impact have you seen on neglecting geomechanics within drilling?
Oh, we're going to get into that in the next section, so maybe I'll hold off on answering that.
Excellent.
Okay.
We did get one that said, explain isotropic anomalies, or isotopic. I don't know if that was supposed to be isotropic or isotopic anomalies.
I'm not sure what is being referred to by the anomaly part. Anisotropic rock properties means that you have, depending on the direction you measure it, you get a different value. So if you're measuring Young's modulus in one direction, like say perpendicular to bedding, and then you measure it parallel to bedding, you get two different numbers. That would be anisotropy. It's quite common in a lot of the unconventional plays.
Excellent. And then
somebody's just trying to get bingo, I think.
This one's a great question, and this is one that I'm actually interested in hearing. It says, Amy, I'm wondering, in your opinion, what's the next step in geomechanics? AI, data science, question mark, question mark?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've seen some people talking about where we could really contribute the most, and where we should be focusing is on long-term productivity of the well. We've been a bit negligent as a community, I think, for decades now, in that we've never been able to prove the value of geomechanics in long-term production. Drilling, no question. Like, we've definitely proved its value there. Hydraulic fracture modeling, I'm going to get to later. Rock mechanics, all that stuff is really well understood, but when it comes to understanding what makes a well productive and what doesn't, we're not there yet.
Okay. So we do have 2 more questions, and then we'll get back to rolling. Thank everybody for watching and staying with us here. So we do have one that's from Yusuf. Have you some example data? Have you example about Algerian data? We've got a lot of people who from Algeria, and I guess work at Sonotrack or Sonotrack, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, that have been watching these episodes. We get really high viewership from that range. So I figured I'd throw them a bone with this question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I do not have any Algerian data to show. I'm sorry.
It's all right. And then we've got one from Kay Jackson. What software are you using to build your model?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, there's a lot of different software out there now. When I was at Geomechanics International, we were building some of the first commercially available software. Other systems and programs were being done internally in some R&D groups at some of the bigger operators, maybe some other universities. But now there's quite a bit of commercial software out there. A lot of petrophysics packages are building geomechanics in. Some geosteering products have geomechanical analysis in there now. So the one I use right now is called GeoSmart by Petrobytes Corp out of Houston. Sashi, I don't know if you're watching. Sashi Ganturo is the CEO, and really it's been a huge support to me to get my consulting business up and running by providing software that I could afford in exchange for some comments on bug reports and technical writing and advice and stuff. So they've been great, but yeah, there's a lot of options out there now.
Excellent. All right, we'll let you get back to it. We've got 2 more sections, guys, and feel free to tag your friends, tag your peers, tag your colleagues, let them know what great education is taking place for free here on the Vidor Lexus Show. All right, all you, Dr. Abe.
All right, great, thanks. All right, so now we're going to switch topics into wellbore stability, drilling optimization, and hole quality. Or my plea is to please think about the well as a system. So I need to explain the wellbore stress concentration for this to make any sense to you. Essentially, very simple concept. If you take a stressed material such as the earth and you punch a hole in it, you develop a stress concentration around the hole. And we have equations dating back to the late 1800s to calculate that stress concentration. It's pretty localized around the wellbore wall. It dissipates by about 1 or 2 borehole radii away from the well, but it can be fairly strong close to the well. A good way to visualize this, if you're having trouble, I like to use a sponge example, that if you take a sponge and you squish the sponge, you create an oval out of that hole that was in the sponge. And what's really happening is there's compression happening at the edges here and here, and there's tension happening 90 degrees to that. And so you get these areas of tension and compression, and sort of the same thing happens in the rock. It's not, the rock doesn't squish like a sponge, but you still get these tension and compression areas around the well. So if this is our area of compression here and here on a cartoon borehole here, and so if we have compression and we exceed the compressive strength of the rock, we get what are called borehole breakouts. So the rock breaks in shear and the material falls out into the well, and we have these enlargements. And we measure the severity of these enlargements according to this angular breakout width here. And if these get too big, you run into drilling problems like tight hole and stuck pipe and excess cavings and fill. If these get to be very wide, say about 90 degrees each, then you've lost half your hole integrity. You tend to end up in sort of a washout situation where the entire hole enlarges, and that can cause all kinds of operational difficulties. And then, and we can see these things on image or caliper logs. This is a borehole image log, and these are the breakouts here where the image is kind of fuzzy because the individual pad can't make good contact with the rock. The electrodes on the pad can't contact the rock very well, and so you get like a fuzzy image. In the tensile region, if we exceed the tensile strength of the rock, we get tensile cracks, and we really need image logs to know if we have these. They can be axial, like this example. These are cracks kind of going along the wellbore axis. They can also be inclined or curved depending on the orientation of the hole relative to the stress, what the stresses are. And a potential symptom of having large-scale tensile failure is lost circulation. So if you actually propagate that fracture into the formation a little bit, you can lose some circulation into there. So why do we care about wellbore failure? Well, because we want to maintain hole stability during drilling. You can actually plan your mud weights to avoid problems. You can make postmortems unnecessary. I took some notes about what Neil Armstrong said in the last session, and if you haven't seen it again, I recommend you go watch it. He did a study of 50 BHAs that were left in the hole for a total cost of $250 million left in the ground and $1 billion in NPT, or non-productive time, all of which was avoidable. And he assigned 17% of that to wellbore stability problems. I would argue that some of the other categories or some of the other assigned time and cost, like hole cleaning, is probably also related to some geomechanical problems. So we're looking at a minimum lost amount of money of $212.5 million, all avoidable by understanding wellbore stability. So there's a lot of money out there. And some people think that we've kind of solved this issue, but we haven't. Wellbore stability is my #1 source of continued work. A colleague of mine here in Canada called it the gift that keeps on giving, because people just don't seem to want to use correct mud weights or don't want to bother doing the calculations to figure out what those should be. And it's not just during drilling, right? I think that we need to make the case that we need to drill a healthy wellbore or a high quality wellbore, because it's going to affect our completions. It's probably going to affect production. So it's important to drill a healthy wellbore. Also, that wellbore stress concentration and is going to control the initiation and propagation of hydraulic fractures. And we also use wellbore failure to actually calculate SH max properly. So instead of doing it from logs, what you do is you figure out what SH max is consistent with the wellbore failure that you actually see happening in your wells. And this is really well explained by Fred Dupriest's papers and his talks that he's given, including here on Vidor Locksmith. This is one of my favorite plots from one of his papers, where They studied over 100 wells. ExxonMobil studied over 100 of their wells worldwide to figure out what was really limiting their drilling performance. And they found that that wellbore stability problems were a major limiter. And so they suggested that you kind of work your way up this pyramid in terms of avoiding problems, which start with modeling wellbore stability early on while you're planning your wells. Also do some historical research and look around where you're drilling and try to understand near misses in the general area historically. And in real time, if you start having problems, start raising your mud weight to deal with those. And then if you do end up with an NPT event, you do a root cause analysis and figure out how to avoid it the next time. One of the most startling statements coming out of this particular paper was experience with detailed analyses and field implementations have led to the general conclusion that all wells should be drilled with the highest practical mud weight. And this is very contrarian to the idea that you got to maximize ROP and drill with the lowest possible mud weight, which I see time and time again. And that just leads to a ton of problems and wasted cost and time. Maybe it's a cowboy thing, but here in Western Canada, I run into the opinion that really we don't care about drilling problems as long as we can get the well in and get it behind casing, no matter what shape it's in. I would argue that's probably not the best way to approach a well. I've been looking for data sets where I have both an image log so I can see wellbore failure and some idea of cement quality, like a cement bond log. And I'm trying to find a good data set where I can make the case that your cement quality may not be as good if you have wellbore failure. This is an example I found pretty recently. This is a wellbore image log. It's an acoustic image log now, so we have full wellbore coverage, and we have the acoustic amplitude on the left-hand track here and the travel time on the right-hand track. And what we can see, there's a couple little tiny breakouts here, and here they are in the travel time image. Most of the well looks like this, beautiful, no wellbore failure, but there are some intervals where we have substantial breakouts. So here we see consistent breakout, not very wide, probably didn't cause much in terms of drilling problems. Maybe they didn't even notice these while they were drilling, but they show up very clearly on the image log. And we happen to have a cement bond analysis done on this well with a full report and very detailed analysis over individual intervals. And in that report, which covered, over 2,000 meters of the borehole, wherever there are these intervals of breakouts, the report mentions a signature in the data that they attribute either to what they call a fast formation or channels in the cement. They can't tell using the type of tool that they had which one it is. But it's just rather startling that only in those intervals do they mention that. All right, so that's my borehole stability. Well quality, ROP isn't the end all be all spiel.
All right, so we do have a couple of questions. So here's one. See if we can get that all the way pulled up there. So how important to reperform geomechanic model for the same field over time? Having it once done will be enough? Question mark. Thanks. And that's from Sarwar Salam. Thanks, Sarwar, for watching.
That's a good question, and it's kind of one I addressed at the very beginning, probably before some people haven't even signed on yet. So it's worth repeating, I guess. Yeah, it depends on how complex your field is and how different your drilling plan is. So, for example, I did a study where, worked on a project where an operator was chasing little sand lenses here and there, and they were restricted on where their surface locations could be. So they were drilling wells in all different directions to reach these sand lenses. And they were surprised that they were having very different drilling experience in their different wells. And it wasn't that the stress was changing over the field, it was just that their well trajectories were changing dramatically. And so that was causing very different wellbore stress concentrations, and that was affecting both their drilling and their completion. So in that case, their drilling plan was complex. In other areas, you might be in a faulted, compartmentalized reservoir, and every time you drill a well, even if it's similar to the last well, you may need to understand the local conditions. So it really depends on the reservoir and your drilling or development plan.
All right, next one. So how much impact to geomechanics per pressure depletion caused by production? 20%, 50%, 80%?
Well, so yeah.
I'm glad you understand the question, because I'm just an MWD guy.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of issues there. Depletion will change the stresses, and so that's something you'd want to model over time and understand how that's changing the reservoir conditions. In some places in the world, depletion also causes substantial compaction and surface subsidence. So in the North Sea, in the Netherlands, places like that, where you have less competent, let's say, overburden, so or the reservoir isn't like highly cemented, so it can deform as depletion, because the pressure actually sort of supports the reservoir, and as you deplete it, you lose some of that support and the reservoir could compact. Much more an issue in conventional reservoirs as opposed to tight unconventional reservoirs. So I'm not sure if the question was more aimed at the compaction aspect or changing conditions in a unconventional reservoir, but it can be very significant even at fairly low percentages, like 20. There's no one number there that's the right answer.
Okay. So the next one is, what is the correlation between microseismic imaging and geomechanics?
Well, microseismic imaging is obviously it's detecting small shear events in the reservoir, and we think they're representing the overall shape of a hydraulic fracture when you're using them to monitor your completions and your stimulation. It's not a direct one-to-one correlation because the hydraulic fracturing process is a process of tensile fracturing. So you're pushing open a hydraulic fracture and propagating that into the formation, whereas microseismic is dependent on detecting little shear events. So there has to be some kind of interaction there between these smaller shear events and the overall hydraulic fracturing process.
All right, we'll get one more, and then guys, I'll try to be able to, if you did ask a question, like I said, if we didn't get to all of them, come back. We'll just stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. It's Friday. It's not like you guys are doing anything else anyways. So another one here from Shane. It seems like a lot of geomechanics models conclude that the environment is strike slip instead of normal stress environment. I'm always a bit skeptical. Is strike slip really that common, especially well away from the mountains?
Yes, it is. Believe it or not, it is. I know I've heard that criticism before, but I'm also astounded at how many people think they're in a normal faulting regime when they are, say, adjacent to the San Andreas Fault or at the edge of a giant, compressional mountain range. So, but there's still tectonic stresses translate through the Earth's crust. So even if you're in, I'm trying to think of a really good example, but you might be in Oklahoma or something, but you could still potentially be in a strike slip stress state. So it's not proximity to something perfectly obvious. It's worth doing the work to figure out what kind of a stress state you're in. But I think I'm going to flip that around and say that it's not that we're assuming strike slip. It's actually we're assuming everyone else is assuming normal faulting when it's actually not the case, and that's getting people into trouble.
All right. Shane, thank you for your question. I'm going to let you get back to it, Amy.
Yep.
And guys, please keep asking the questions. I know there's even more coming in. Like this is I used to struggle to get people to even comment, much less ask questions on shows. And now it's almost like there's too many.
Yeah.
So we're going to do our best until Amy says no more. She taps out and wants to go home or do something else. We'll keep going here. So we know we got one more section with this, but guys, please share tag somebody else in the comments. Let them know what we're doing here. So, all right, Amy, it's all you.
Okay. Well, the last section is pretty short. It's just a plea to get people to start being realistic about hydraulic fractures and natural fractures. I think this is another area where we're going to see some advances being made, quite a few advances in the near future. And I'm really looking forward to it because I'm tired of people treating the subsurface like it's some kind of big uniform material. Just want to point out, I hope by now, everything I've been talking about has made people understand there's a whole lot more to geomechanics than just hydraulic fracturing and hydraulic fracture modeling. I know that's, at least in North America and unconventional plays, that's the big topic right now, but there's a lot more to geomechanics than just that. I think also I want to point out that hydraulic fracture models are wrong, and the modelers, people who really understand modeling, will agree with that. As the famous quote goes, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. So I'm not saying that hydraulic fracture modeling is not useful. I'm just saying we got to understand the assumptions and the limitations that go into those models. Even if you look back at some of the literature from the very first hydraulic fracture models, you will see the descriptions of how important it is to get the input data correct, to get as robust input data as you can. And over time, our models have gotten more and more complex. And so that just adds even more need for good data and even larger need to understand the assumptions in the models and the limitations. And I think we've unfortunately gone to collecting less data. So we have more complex models with more data needs and less data to put into them. So it's a tricky situation. I mean, we know the models are correct. I mean, the physics behind them is correct. So even if it's a simple planar bi-wing fracture model, or it's a super complex model that includes natural fractures and asymmetry and stress shadowing and all that fun stuff, the physics is physics and we can get that right. But it's a matter of everything else. What does the actual hydraulic fracture look like in the subsurface? What is the optimal rock type? How are barriers affecting the fracture? What's the optimal stage spacing or well spacing or completion style? Going back to one of the last questions, what exactly is microseismic data trying to tell us? And what causes frac hits? How can we mitigate frac hits? What are they trying to tell us? How are hydraulic fractures inducing seismicity? These are all things we don't know for sure yet. We're working on it, and we will start to figure some of these things out. But they're not very well constrained right now. And some of the most exciting stuff I've seen in recent days has been, the work coming out of the hydraulic fracture test sites. This is a snapshot from the Midland Basin one, where they've got core that was caught and preserved very quickly after it was brought to the surface, and then they unwrapped it and started looking at what they were seeing, and they saw a complex interaction between, there's some natural fracturing there, there's some, they think hydraulic fractures, not really sure. There's other fractures. What does that mean? Is it coring induced? Is it natural? Did it exist in the subsurface? So these core back experiments or mine back experiments are going to start helping us understand our hydraulic fractures a lot better. There's another example in the Marcellus. Now, in the Marcellus, it's very well known that there's lots of natural fractures. They're very well categorized. They interact with the in situ stresses in a sort of understandable way, but we still have a lot to learn from that. In this particular example, it's saying that perhaps fractures that are not critically stressed or critically oriented in the stress field, maybe they result in slow slip, whereas fractures that are critically stressed result in more of a fast, high frequency microseismic expression. So these are some things we're starting to learn. And even in I gave a talk last year, so about a couple of formations here in Canada, one of which is called the Montney, very active play here right now. Unconventional play, generally considered to be a shale, although it's not really a conventional shale, but it is very tight, and a lot of people would argue that it doesn't have natural fractures. So one of the talks I gave was to try to point out that that's just not the case. So I was working with a colleague of mine and showing examples from core where we had obvious kind of brittle deformation and fracture filling. We had slip and slided polished surfaces in bedding parallel fractures, so that showed obvious slip. And we had even some breccia zones. So, you know, there's more going on in our rocks often than we like to admit. So, did anybody win the bingo? That's all I've got. I wasn't sure how long it would take to get through that. I didn't want to put too much in, but I'm happy to stick around and answer questions.
So I know that we've got a bunch of questions rolling in. I should say this, I don't know where the comment's at. It's way back here, but somebody had mentioned they really appreciated the sponge analogy. Oh, and that was very useful for them. So just wanted to be able to put that one out there. So guys, if you guys do have a question, please start throwing them in. We really do appreciate, you know, any of the questions, comments, and everything come back. I will say this, there's a 30-second delay about what we're saying and what's being broadcast and what you can see, at minimum 30-second delay. So if you ask a question, we don't get to it like right away. There's at least a little bit of a delay. So just start throwing them out there, guys, and we'll just start you know, bringing everything in. We've got somebody spamming the comment section about some of the stuff that they're doing. But here we go. Ray Lamborn from Baker Hughes. What technologies, surface and or downhole, are recommended for a geomechanics model, conventional and unconventional reservoirs, if they are different? Ray, thanks for watching the show. I always appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that's speaking to what kind of data set we need to build the geomechanical model and whether it differs between conventional and unconventional. Well, the number one thing is image logs. I mean, we really base a lot of our geomechanical model on the wellbore failure that we see, and if we don't know what the wellbore failure is, we can't build the model. So the image logs are the only way we're going to see both breakouts and tensile fractures, and we're going to be able to get that detailed breakout width, that angular width of the breakout. In caliper logs, you can get the enlargement, so you know whether or not you have breakouts, but you don't get that width, and you can't see the tensile fractures. So there's a limitation there. And that's true in conventional or unconventional reservoirs. One of the big changes between conventional and unconventional that I've seen is in conventional, we used to do a lot of what we call leak-off tests. Commonly done, like an intermediate casing would be put in, and then a little bit new hole would be drilled, and then a leak-off test would be done to kind of determine safe mud windows for drilling ahead. And that would give us some idea of the minimum stress. And if we had multiple ones along the well, we could create a stress profile from that. We tend not to do those in unconventionals. What happens now is a long lateral is drilled, and then a mini frac or a defit is done at the toe, and that gives us a minimum stress. But that's a very different location than up hole, you know, in the intermediate hole section. So, and it's a different type of data. So that's been one big change between conventionals and unconventionals. But I mean, we need good pore pressure data. We need some idea of our wellbore failure, and we need some rock properties data. We're usually calculating the rock properties from the density and other logs, the size sonic logs.
So on staying on that topic, what alternative is there to expensive LWD sonic tools for acquiring the data that we need? And so I'll add to this, how helpful is the azimuthal gamma data that has now become a little bit more prominent in U.S. land operations?
Yeah, it's prominent up here too. I haven't used it for anything yet. Gamma is not, I mean, it's important for distinguishing lithologies, but it doesn't really help us in calculating rock properties in general. Don't really use that very often. But what was the original? Oh, LWD. Yeah. So, there's wireline sonic, there's LWD sonic. There's, I don't know if you guys have seen this logging while tripping technology, where the logging tool it's part of the BHA and they log on the way out during a trip. So there's new technologies out there. I don't know much about the costs myself because I'm not usually in that part of the process where the data is being acquired or decisions are being made to acquire the data.
Well, they should keep you in those parts.
Yeah.
All right. So, Blaine, thank you for the question. And please let me know how many mistakes I've made so far today, since he was keeping track of that earlier. Carlos says, I have two questions. During a leak-off test in shales, I have noticed that the FCP is higher than the leak-off point. We normally expect to have the leak-off point to be higher than FCP. Okay. What do you think? Why do you think it happens?
I'm not going to even try to answer the second part of the question as to why it happens. How people pick these different pressures and closure points on the different types of tests is really subjective and inconsistent. But in general, yeah, they are different numbers, that leak-off point versus a true fracture closure. So in a leak-off test, you're not actually going so far as creating a fracture and propagating it into the formation and watching for when it closes. You're just starting to break the rock and you're losing a little bit of fluid into it. In a full, or what we would call an extended leak-off test, which looks very much like what now we call a defit or a mini frac, you actually you break down the formation, you propagate a fracture into it, and then you stop pumping and you watch for the signature of when that fracture closes, and then that's your minimum stress estimate. So there are two very different estimates. As for consistent one being greater or lower than the other one, I don't have any comments on that.
All right, so I'm going to throw up another one. So, Carlos, thank you for the question. And you guys keep firing them off. I'm trying to keep up with as many of these as I can. So, Eric's watching. Can you kindly address the effect of temperature while resuming drilling, cold mud arriving downhole that creates an increase of stress, possibly opening fractures, and that can be mistaken for ballooning? Similarly, warming up your top hole is reducing the stress on the formation. They're equivalent to lowering the ECD.
Yeah, it's a good and complex question. I think temperature is something we don't consider often enough in our analyses. The cooling of the rock does two things. It actually strengthens the rock or makes breakouts less likely. Let's put it that way. So it reduces the risk of breakout severity, but it increases the risk of tensile fracture severity. So you could conceptually cool the rock and create a tensile fracture that you would then lose circulation into, which he mentioned ballooning or wellbore breathing, and that's where we think fluid's being lost into natural fractures, and then we regain that fluid when we back off the pressure in the well. So it can be hard to distinguish what you're losing fluid to, whether it's natural fractures or tensile fractures. Cooling of the rock with the mud does increase the risk of tensile fractures, so maybe that increases the risk of that type of lost circulation. I have one anecdotal reference. I don't remember where I heard it, but I heard of one operator that was actually cooling their fracking fluid to try to make hydraulic fracturing easier by using that concept that cooling the rock makes it more prone to tensile failure.
Interesting. Wonder if that worked out for them. All right, so we've got another question here. It's from LinkedIn user. So I don't know why I didn't pull up the person's name. I apologize. I can't fix this problem. So what value is mud logging in geomechanics?
I think it's really important, especially when we're trying to figure out our rock property profile, like our rock strength. I didn't get into it. I kind of poo-pooed on brittleness and Young's modulus and Poisson's ratio. I didn't spend much time talking about what rock properties are seriously important in terms of wellbore stability, and that is rock strength properties. So unconfined compressive strength, tensile strength, And, we rely very much on understanding our lithology to try to estimate those. And so the mud logging is very important for understanding the different lithologies that we're drilling through. I think it's also underutilized in terms of detecting natural fractures. I think there's a lot of information in the cuttings descriptions that could probably be used to help understand if we're drilling through natural fractures or not.
So we have another one from, again, from LinkedIn user. How has the advent and the use of DFIT helped your job in geomechanical modeling?
It hasn't. It's made it worse. Because, instead of having multiple leak-off tests, now we're relying on this one test at the very toe of the well to try to predict what's going on in the whole rest of the well. So it's kind of reduced the amount of data we're getting. But if it's a good test and it's well done, there is useful information to get out of it. We can estimate a closure pressure from it. How you do that is a matter of much heated debate in the community. There's a whole community of people out there totally focused on DFIT interpretation and how you should be doing it. In that respect, it's made my job a little harder because I have to approach every operator with caution as to how they want to do their DFIT interpretations and how I use that data.
So I believe one of the LinkedIn user comments, I don't know if it's this one, was actually Chief Technical Officer or Chief Technical Advisor Robert Estes. So Robert, thanks for the question. I do appreciate it, whichever one it was, but we do appreciate you watching and taking part. So now we've got another one from Jackie. Question: would it be possible to have a real-time geomechanics during drilling to update model we had on pre-drilling model, either 1D or 3D?
It is totally possible, and I'd have to ask if you're working for a company that makes software that does that. Yeah, there's lots of packages out there, and you don't even need a specialized while drilling modeling package. You just need to be paying attention to the data as it comes in and updating your model accordingly. So you do a pre-drill model, and maybe you have to adjust some pore pressures on the fly, or maybe you enter some certain formations sooner or later than you thought you were going to, or whatever. But yeah, that's entirely possible, and it's done quite regularly.
So we got another one here. In Virgin Wildcat well, what is the best approach to deliver safely and good well from planning to drilling? That's a very, very broad question, but I'm gonna hopefully we'll just keep it to the geomechanics stuff.
Yeah, no, I get this a lot. It's not exactly in that exact form, but often clients will say, well, it's less of an issue here in Canada because we have a lot of public data, but in other parts of the world where there's not public databases, you're drilling your first well, you don't have any data, what are you supposed to do? So clients will say, well, we don't think we have enough data to build a geomechanical model. And my argument is that you always have enough data to build an initial geomechanical model. You just use whatever you have. Maybe it's just the world stress map and some expected lithologies and some typical strength values for those lithologies. Maybe you calculate your overburden based on a simplified assumed density, column, and you just, you have to start somewhere. And the important part is you have to appreciate all the uncertainty in that model and be ready for the range of possibilities that you might run into based on your uncertainties in your model. And then as you're drilling, that's new data. And then every time you drill, you have the opportunity to collect new data. Even the drilling of the well itself and what happens while the well is being drilled is additional data. So say you start having a bunch of tight hole issues in a certain formation, well, you can pretty much assume you're having some wellbore failure in that section. And does that match your model? If it doesn't, then you go back and adjust your model accordingly.
Thanks for the question. For the previous, so Adonis is always watching these. I really do appreciate it. He's helped out a lot. Is it common to assess wellbore stability for various stages of the well construction process? A lot of times effort is focused mainly on drilling, leaving issues during casing installation aside. This can lead to NPT, loss of footage, etc. what would be the best practices, or let's say better practices, to include during casing installation from your perspective? Adonis, thanks for the question. It's an excellent one.
I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I do often have to remind clients that they may be drilling through a certain formation and they need a certain mud weight to get through that, but they can't then just change the mud weight without any repercussions below that if that is still exposed. So you have to worry about whatever section of the well, you have to worry about that section as long as it is exposed to the drilling fluid. So I can't remember where it was from. It was a long time ago in my career now, but we had a really good example where a well had been, an image log had been acquired in a well at one point in time, and then maybe 1 or 2 weeks later or something, maybe it was just a few days, I can't remember now, but we saw the breakouts increase substantially in width from the first image log to the second image log. So that well had remained exposed, the mud weight had gone down, and the breakouts increased. So it's kind of the same, it's exposure time. So it's exposure time and what's the density of the fluid that the well is exposed to. If you drill your well and you leave a portion of it exposed, and then you stop paying attention to your mud weight between the time you stop drilling and the time you install your casing, yeah, things may have changed.
Excellent. So I think I think this one's a question. Complex marine environments, question mark. How variant is the range for lower upper limits within geomechanics modeling? How can we get the right numbers? ALARP.
I don't know what ALARP.
I know what AARP is, but
offshore can be extremely complicated. Most of my experience is onshore, but offshore you can run into very, very, very tight mud weight windows where you have almost no wiggle room. In that case, managed pressure drilling or something might be a good option to maintain that mud weight very carefully. Another issue is the mud window may be very narrow and change with depth in a way that you have to set multiple intermediate casings to keep the wellbore safe. So you'll see offshore wells with many, many casing strings. It can be extremely complex.
As low as reasonably practical.
See, here I refer you to be lectured by Fred Dupriest, and let him explain to you why keeping your mud weight as low as practical is not probably the best option.
And I'll say this to everybody in the industry that's still watching: it's the best idea not to talk in acronyms, because none of us know them all.
It's true. And I've got several on my little bingo card here.
It's I don't know how many times I'm like, okay, I don't know what that one is now. All right, let's see here. This one's from Cade. Cade, can you discuss gamma ray correlation to wellbore breakout for horizontal drilling after you have created your model? Kind of discussed this one a little bit earlier, but we can go ahead.
I'm reading it. Discuss gamma ray correlation to wellbore breakout for horizontal drilling after you've created. Not 100% sure what the connection is here between the gamma ray and the breakout. Do you just mean like higher gamma formations may be weaker, maybe more prone to breakout or something? Not 100% understanding what's being asked, unfortunately.
Okay, get back to us on that one. So I'll go back to ask one of the questions that we did get earlier, even though we did kind of go through that section. What has been the biggest fault you have seen, or the biggest mistake, I shouldn't say fault, the biggest or the most common mistake you've seen on the drilling side as far as geomechanics is concerned?
I'd have to say, and this agrees with Fred and Neil, I think, is the chasing the high ROP by lowering mud weight. I think it's something that ends up biting you in the back end in the end. Not all the time, obviously, but sometimes. But how much is it worth to chase that and then lose a well, leave an entire BHA in the hole? I mean, how much winning did you just erase because of that one problem?
Very true. All right, so Kate Jackson just said yes. So I don't really know if did that answer it enough for you? Like, I think you saying about the higher gamma counts.
Oh yeah, there's not always a direct correlation, but obviously shalier lithologies tend to be weaker, but shale has a bunch of different definitions these days, so that's not always the case.
Okay, so actually, here's a question that's coming in from YouTube. So we've got all of like 10 viewers on YouTube. So let's be sure to has there been any work done recently with pore pressure predictions in upthrust formations, such as seen around salt domes? Michael, thanks for watching. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, drilling around salt domes is really complex. Because salt domes, if they're plastic and mobile, they can't support any shear stress. So whatever's going on in the rock, if there's any kind of stress differential, that has to kind of be gone by the time you're in the salt. So near the salt domes, you get rapid changes in stress orientations and magnitudes. And you can have very complex pressure compartments and stuff around salt domes too, because you tend to have some faulting and whatnot. So there's been lots of work done, and I would encourage you to check out the literature on that. There's probably a lot out there. I have not worked anywhere near salt since probably the first year of my career. That was a long time ago now.
So I know that we've had a lot of other questions in here. I'm going to give you one more, Amy, so that we can let you go. Let's see here. Here we go. This one's from LinkedIn user. I think what's happening is if somebody asks the questions and then they leave the session, then they just get called LinkedIn user. So maybe they come back, maybe they don't. I should say this real quick. Michael asked the question on both YouTube and LinkedIn. So Michael, thanks for watching on both channels. Kudos to you, sir. I think for that, I'm going to send him one of these little drill bit keychains that I've got sitting over here on the side. So this one, the question is, please, which direction to drill wellbore to avoid wellbore instability with respect to the stress regime, i.e. drill in the direction of max horizontal or minimum horizontal stress?
That's a good question. That's been a major change from unconventionals to from conventional reservoirs to unconventional reservoirs. In the early days of wellbore stability consulting, we would use exactly that concept and say you should probably deviate your well in a certain direction to maximize stability, minimize drilling problems. And that would generally, I don't want to say this in every single case, but generally that would be in the direction of the maximum horizontal stress, which is opposite now to the way everybody wants to drill. Everybody wants to drill perpendicular to the maximum horizontal stress because they want, in unconventionals, they want their multi-stage fracs to be perpendicular to the wellbore, and those are going to go in the direction of maximum horizontal stress. So they drill perpendicular to that, which can add to wellbore stability issues. So they're kind of going the opposite and having to deal with some wellbore stability. And so it's like again, it's sort of a balancing act. You're balancing your drilling with your completions optimization. And as long as you're informed and you're, putting the work in to understand both, you should be able to pull that off.
Excellent. Well, Amy, any last words from you? Anything you would like to be able to share with the industry?
No, that's been fun. It was hard to pick exactly what I wanted to talk about once I got started. So it was a bit of a disjointed presentation, but I hope people got a little bit out of it. I'm going to go back and probably not watch it after it's recorded because it'll be just too freaky to watch myself talk, but I want to go through the chat and see what everybody was saying during the presentation.
I can assure you this. I don't go back and watch any of these. I just cannot. It just, all I do is go, oh, I messed up there. Trust me, Blaine will count maybe 3. I'll count like 100 times where I was just like, oh, that's terrible. Oh, I should have done this. So, but I will
got to go
this.
easier on yourself.
Yeah. So Michael and everybody else that's watching, I do have a whole bunch of these drill bit keychains. So for everybody that's out there, if you want one of these, share this, comment, like spread the word, and I will put one of these in the mail for you. Thanks, Aaron Dean and Altera, for providing me with these. I think that was their way of being able to sponsor the show without really sponsoring the show. I see what you did there, sir. So you guys let me know if you want one of those. They've just been sitting here on my desk since like January, and I keep forgetting to give them out. So, Amy, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for busting myths in the geomechanics area. For everybody that's out there watching, please comment, like this, share it, do all the stuff that all the other social media people tell you to do. We are looking to be able to do some other episodes here in the near future. One with David Ransom Wood on how to be able to do finances in regards to drilling wells. We've also got some geomechanics stuff, or not geomechanics, I'm sorry, drilling mechanics stuff coming up with Dan Cervantes from Lodestar International Company I used to work at, so I know they've got some really cool stuff to be able to share. Next Friday is Steve Noss doing some managed pressure drilling stuff. We've also got another managed pressure drilling one that we're probably going to be in 2 weeks. I'm trying to get Dr. Robello to be able to come on and do something with BHA modeling or BHA design. So I'm constantly pushing the envelope here, guys. We're trying to get as many people as we can to be able to come on and do this educational format, as well as I'm still going to be doing some interviews here in the near future, kind of like the old format that we used to do. All of them have been successful. I truly appreciate all of those that are watching. It makes such a huge difference having the feedback and being able to see the show grow and knowing that we are doing the right thing to be able to help everybody out there. Amy, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody out there, be sure to follow the hashtag Vidor Locksmith. Go connect with Amy. If you haven't connected with me, be sure to do so. And as always, let me see if I get this pulled up so I can do it in the right timing. Know your industry. And I think did it end? Nope, didn't end on time. Sorry.